What's going on, guys? Zeal here, and I wanted to talk about gaming's current open secret, and it's called Deadlock. It's by Valve. Valve are the developers, for anyone who doesn't know, anyone who's been living under a rock for the last 20 years or something. Valve's a company behind Steam, and pretty much they are PC darlings. They are the developers of beloved titles such as Half-Life, Team Fortress 2, Portal, and Dota 2. Dota 2, I'm a huge Dota player. I've been playing Dota for probably more than 10 years now. Pretty much like started when it was a Warcraft 3 mod, so I'm a OG Dota 1 during the Frozen Throne days. I've been playing since then. I haven't played in the last few years because I just kind of fell out of love with it, with a lot of the design decisions that Valve has made with it, the development of the game, and sort of design of things. But we're not here to talk about Dota, we're here to talk about Deadlock. Now, Deadlock is the game that Valve is making. It's probably the first new multiplayer game they've made in a long time. Probably the first new game they've made in a long time since Half-Life Alyx, if you want to count that. And the game is a 6v6 hero shooter, right? So there's 6 heroes on each side. And before I get into any more details about game mechanics, I just want to preface this by saying that all the game mechanics here that I'm going to talk about are very, very, very subject to change. So the game is in private alpha, very early private alpha. That being said, let's get into some details here. So essentially, it's a 6v6 third-person hero shooter. It's got the lane mechanics of your typical MOBA, right? So it's got the last hitting, the denying, the farming. Creeps spawn periodically in 4 lanes, denoted by these like colored transit lines. There are items, builds. There's your early game, there's your late game items, there's your active items, and there's limits to how many items you can hold. If you've played Dota or League of Legends, then this should feel right at home for you. The other major design portion of the game that makes up sort of the design philosophy and the way the minute-to-minute gameplay works is that it is a third-person shooter, right? So that involves shooting, accuracy, positioning, things like that. You've got like your strafing, you've got your slides, your air dashes, your movement abilities, things like that. Those can also be upgraded with items and other things like that. But it involves some targeted spells you need to hit in addition to your bullets. And every character has like different ways of shooting. So some characters have like shotguns, others have revolvers, some have lasers, things like that. And they all have different like ammo counts, which can all be upgraded and modified. So there's a lot of systems at work here. There's a lot to keep track of. And I guess this isn't more of a review as it is like what are just my like super natty thoughts on the game and how it feels to play and things like that. And right off the bat, I want to say at first I was very skeptical. It seemed like there was mechanic overload. It is a very, very deep game. There's a lot of systems at work here. Like I said, every single aspect of your character can be upgraded or modified, and that means that you as a player need to keep track of other players' modifications, right? So if a player is speccing into maybe having like really large magazines with a lot of bullet damage, you need to be aware of that, right? So it's hard to keep track of sort of like kill ranges, timings, things like that. Some players will obviously love that. I think it is a very, very deep game, like I said, so you'll be able to modify things and learn things and get sort of a deep mastery over the game mechanics. All of these heroes have skills and abilities you need to keep track of, and every time you level, those abilities can change. So for example, you can have someone that throws a dagger, but at level 3 that dagger bounces, so you need to be aware of those things. If you're the type of person that wants to sink their teeth into a game that's going to be very, very deep, very, very complicated, has a lot of bells and whistles to it that will allow you to sort of get that mastery and something like Dota, right? Like Dota just has a lot of things that you can get really good at. The ceiling is extremely high. Then I think Deadlock's the game for you. I think this is something that should absolutely be on your radar. That being said, if you're someone that seems overwhelmed by the burden of knowledge that appears in the beginning of the game and is immediately off-put by how much someone needs to learn to enjoy a game, then maybe Deadlock is something that, could be a bit difficult to get into. I think I would highly, highly suggest queuing up with a group of friends. It is 6v6, so you can find 5 other friends that you could play with. You'll be separated into lanes based off of, some people have two people in a lane, some of them are solo lanes, but it's very flexible. You can, switch those around at the beginning of the game. It sort of auto assigns you to lanes, so there's not much complaining and arguing about who's going mid, who's going top, who's going bottom. The game just starts you off on these transit lines, so you end up in the lanes pretty fast. So that's sort of like, the depth of systems here. I do think that once you start actually getting into the game and understanding the way things work, the game is extremely fun. I've had nights where I'm absolutely miserable and I'm like, oh my God, why am I playing this game? I need to get off. I need to stop playing. But something about it makes me want to keep coming back to it. And I think one of the things that lends itself to this addictive gameplay loop is, it's actually 2 things. One is that it's a shooter, so shooters are naturally just more dynamic. There's just a lot going on. It's more fun, it's more active. When you're hitting shots, you feel like impactful, you feel like you're really affecting the game, and there's never like really any boring moments in the game, I would say. I think Valve has done a great job of keeping every minute of the game very active and very fun. There's very, very little downtime between fights. There's a lot of fighting going on. In lane, there's a ton of spells going out. There is no mana in this game, so you can use abilities off cooldown, and there's a lot of ways to improve the cooldown, so you can use spells a lot. You're pretty much always doing something, right? A lot of the characters' animations are flashy, a lot of the spells are impactful. The other thing that I think makes the game extremely fun and active is that there is no real support role. Meaning, in your general MOBA game, right, you have a breakdown of your positions 1 through 5, which will get different amounts of farm. So you have your carries, you have your mids, you have your supports, and essentially there's a different farm priority for each character. But in Deadlock, you're not actually divvying up farm in that way. Yeah, naturally some characters farm more, some characters farm less, but there isn't that much difference between the farm priorities and characters. Everyone should be genuinely equally farmed. I mean, obviously the game's not going to pan out that way. There's going to be some characters that are extremely farmed and some that aren't. But generally everyone has the same farm priority. So you should be getting farm. No one has like, if you're a support and you're going into the jungle and a carry comes over and takes your camps, you don't have to feel bad about that. You can fight for your right to farm the jungle camps. You're not in that sacrificial role necessarily. So, you can play your character and build your character how you want to build them. And that's sort of like the systems in place. It's kind of a beautiful combination of these 2 like design paradigms where you have like your MOBA hero shooter and you have like your creep farming and itemization and leveling and things like that, in addition to this whole like very dynamic 3D space where you're navigating verticality, you're navigating hiding behind objects because you have to hit bullets and hit abilities. I think obviously the most natural comparison here is Smite. Smite is something that has sort of that third person over the shoulder view to it while also having the lanes and the farming. And I think Deadlock really does have a lot of potential to be that sort of mainstay competitive shooting game that has a very dedicated community to it. It's already got around 200,000 people with like 20,000 concurrent players. I think it's already got proven legs, and I think the way that Valve is going about developing this game is actually really smart. I think by making it a like open secret where it's sort of being developed but you're not able to talk about it, controls the narrative around the game a lot. I think Valve are very, very intelligent. They're very smart people who develop games over there. And they're run by someone that has a very deep understanding of the games industry. And I think he understands that first impressions on a game are extremely important, and being able to control the narrative that comes out with a game in the very beginning while things are still being tweaked and things are still being fine-tuned, to be able to control the narrative around what people's impressions of the game are is really, really smart. I think this is actually one of the newest ways I've seen a game develop like this. Games generally will go into like private beta or open beta, early access, things like that, but the main thing is that the game is out. The game is out. When your game's in early access, it's out. This whole like, we're still tweaking things. When that game first gets into players' hands, when you're able to go to the website, download the game, and play it immediately for free, I think at that point, your game is released, whether you want to define it as early access or not. The game is in the player's hands. You cannot control the narrative anymore. But by doing this like weird kind of in between, you can't talk about the game, but if you want to play the game, it's relatively easy to get in now. I think it allows them to have a very, very focused approach on how they want the game to be talked about, which allows them to develop the game in a really smart way by getting a lot of player feedback, but not necessarily have it so open to the public where public perceptions can be created right off the bat, right, without them maybe developing the game fully how they see fit. And another aspect I wanted to talk about was sort of the art and the design of the game. I think that this is one of the more unique areas that Valve has always excelled in, this sort of source engine, very stylized design without it being too cartoony. And Valve have a history of being able to develop that type of art style very, very well, very, very easily. And Valve have been able to design that art style using the source engine very well. So the theme of the game is this kind of like a cult gothic theme, but without leaning into it so hard that it becomes very dismal. It's still got a lot of character to it. There's a lot of like, classic Valve humor, a lot of like just funniness to it, a lot of quirkiness to a lot of the characters. There's a giant mole with like a bowler hat on, straight out of like 1800s London. There's, this like Korean guy with like a scarf and like a pea coat. There's, there's sentient robots. There's a lot of like weird scientific stuff. There's a lot of weird stuff with like physics. You have characters who are mad scientists. It feels very like Van Helsing at times. There's gargoyles, there's vampires, there's, zombies, things like that. And I think this is a very, very cool and unique theme. And I think it gives it a lot of style and a lot of character to the game, which I think it's so different from a lot of other hero shooters, where the hero shooters that, end up seeming like everything else. You have things like Concord coming out. All right, we've seen it before, the weird sci-fi Destiny-esque menus and things like that. We've seen this all before. This isn't something new. But with games like Overwatch, for example, Overwatch leaned into the whole Pixar style, which I thought was really unique and held up with players really well. And in the same vein, I think Deadlock's style is something that will really resonate with a lot of people. Again, subject to change. I think a lot of the character models are very, very DIY. They're very placeholder. Some textures aren't even finished yet. But, all that being said, I think that this game is something that is extremely fun. I think if you give it time, it'll really grow with you. I think you get really, really into the nitty gritties of a lot of the movement, of a lot of the shooting mechanics, the abilities, the way you want to build your character. One thing I think is really cool is that each character can be built in a lot of different ways. So I think Valve is really focusing on making sure that they hear a lot of feedback. The dev forums are full of feedback. People are fine-tuning the game. Patch notes are coming out every week. New heroes are being released. So a lot of this is subject to change. But I would say overall, at the end of the day, the question that needs to be asked is it fun? Right? And I've already got 100 hours in this thing. And I will say, as someone who is not very big on hero shooters, I'm not big on competitive games in general. I dabble here and there. I will say this is fun. Deadlock is fun. This is a game that should absolutely be on everyone's radar. And I think that if Valve developed the game correctly, which so far, I've been in the private alpha for a few months now. So far, it looks like they know what they're doing with developing this game. There's nothing egregious yet. There's nothing that's game breaking yet. I'm very excited. I think you should be very excited. But yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on Deadlock so far after playing 100 hours of it. I really appreciate you clicking on the video and listening to my thoughts on this game. So I'll catch you next time.